Welcome to today's session. Hopefully you'll find it useful. This is just an opportunity for you to find out about what hypnobirthing is, how it works. So before we start, I have to give my disclaimer. If you have any medical concerns, please speak to your midwife or your doctor. This is not a replacement for professional medical advice. This is also not giving you the full hypnobirthing course. This is just a taster, just an explanation of what it is, and what hypnobirthing covers, what it is and what it isn't. So to give you first off a little bit about me, I don't know where you found me. You probably found me on Instagram. Most people find me on Instagram. But my name is Erin. I am a hypnobirthing and antenatal instructor. I'm a mum of three, so I've given birth 3 times. I had a very medicalized birth with my first birth. I was induced, didn't question it, didn't really understand why I was being induced, but agreed to it anyway. I went in blind, and it was not the most of positive experiences, which I think safe to say. I think a lot of people who aren't well informed and go into an induction without understanding why they're being induced can often have quite negative experiences. That led to a cascade of medical intervention, which can happen. I ended up asking for pethidine. I had an epidural. I had a very drowsy baby who wouldn't breastfeed. I narrowly missed a forceps birth, had an episiotomy, and then was left with a baby that just wouldn't feed, had lots of problems, and I ended up with postnatal depression for the first year of being a parent, a first-time parent. So when I got pregnant with my second, I thought, I'm not making the same mistakes. I'm going to do some prep. So I did a hypnobirthing course. I got myself a doula. I really researched about my birth preferences, and I ended up giving birth on the midwifery-led unit at my local hospital, and had an amazing water birth, which is this little birth that you can see on the slide on the right. And then when I got pregnant for the 3rd time, my husband suggested that we have a home birth. We did research, felt like it was a really, really good option. And I had an amazing home birth again with a doula. So I've had various different experiences of giving birth. Labor ward, midwifery-led unit, home, very medicalized with all the drugs, through to a birth with no medical interventions, no drugs, very, very hands off. And my last birth, I think, really it transformed my view of birth. It made me realize that birth can be a very different experience. It doesn't have to be traumatic. And I'm not saying it has to be unmedicalized to not be traumatic, but I think it needs to be well informed. And that made me decide to quit my career as a marketer for 15 years and retrain to be a hypnobirthing instructor. And I've been doing this now for a number of years. And I'm really passionate about helping people have a more informed and positive birthing experience. So that's just a little bit about me and why I do what I do. But we're not here to talk about me. We're here to talk about hypnobirthing. So I want you to have a think about the first word that pops into your head when you think about giving birth. I mean, most people will put quite negative words like pain or loss of control or hospital. And these are all really common words that people put down, and they're all really understandable. And I'll explain why they're understandable in a minute as we go through the session. Okay, so remember the word that you put down, the word that you thought, and at the end of today's session, we'll repeat the same exercise and we'll see if it's changed, because hopefully it will have. So second off, what's your idea of hypnobirthing? What's the first word that comes into your head when you think about hypnobirthing? It's interesting because I think hypnobirthing is quite misunderstood. So quite often people will think of things like breathing, breathing techniques, or they'll think of hypnosis, or they'll think of drug-free water births, for example. And then those answers aren't necessarily wrong. They are all things that you may be aiming for or want to achieve with hypnobirthing, but that's not just what hypnobirthing is about. So what hypnobirthing isn't is it's not just breathing techniques. And I think that's something that a lot of people think, instantly when they think about hypnobirthing, they think breathing techniques. And that's a part of hypnobirthing, but it's not, the be all and end all of hypnobirthing. It's not being hypnotized like you see on TV. When you watch Darren Brown or, other kind of hypnotists on TV, that stage hypnosis is very, very different. This is therapeutic hypnosis, which we use for hypnobirthing. It's not really hippy dippy. Lots of people think if you're doing hypnobirthing, you're a bit woo and a bit out there and a bit alternative. And it's not just for drug-free home water births. Lots of people think if you're doing hypnobirthing, you have to have this unmedicalized, natural birth. And lots of people think about home birth and drug-free births when they think about hypnobirthing, and that's not the case. I have clients who do courses with me and they're planning a C-section. Hypnobirthing is applicable and the techniques are applicable to help with any kind of birth. It doesn't really matter what you're aiming for, what kind of birth you plan to have. Hypnobirthing can help with any kind of birth. So what it is a birth preparation technique. So it uses guided hypnosis, which is where the hypno bit comes from hypnobirthing. It uses repetition of positive affirmations and imagery. And those are all kind of the hypno side of things. And then it also is balanced evidence-based antenatal education. So the kind of thing that you might think about with hospital antenatal classes or NCT classes or other kinds of antenatal prep classes, a good hypnobirthing course will give you that as well. So I cover all of that kind of stuff, the stages of labor, what happens to your baby and your body, birth positions, birth planning, medical interventions, all those kind of things I cover in my hypnobirthing course. And you need those two things together for you to have a positive experience, because all of the coping methods in the world are not potentially going to help if you end up in a situation that you have not prepared for, you have no knowledge of. That can feel very scary and very disempowering, and that can lead to a negative experience. So it's important that you have both of those things together, the coping methods and working on a subconscious level to help undo a lot of the negative associations we have around birth, and having the knowledge about the process of birth, the pathways of care, the things that you might be offered, so that you can make evidence-based balanced decisions and put those two things together to give you a really positive experience giving birth. So why do we prepare for birth? Why is it important? And it is important. It's really important. I compare it to planning for a wedding. Now, I don't know if you're all married or not, but lots of us have been to weddings, right? We've been to weddings. We understand the amount of time and effort that goes into planning a wedding, right? We understand that some of us will plan for our weddings for years in advance, and we invest huge amounts of money on our weddings. Why? Because it's one of the most important days in your life. It's one of those days that you're going to remember for the rest of your life. It's a milestone. It's really important. So we spend a lot of money and a lot of time planning for that special day. So what do we do when we plan for our weddings? We write a plan. I'm a type A personality. I am a control freak. When I planned my wedding, I had spreadsheets coming out of my ears. I had a spreadsheet for guest list. I had a spreadsheet for venues. I had a spreadsheet for budget. I planned down to the very minute detail because it was important. We think about venue. Where are we going to get married? We think about, are we going to get married in a church or a registry office or a field? Are we going to get married abroad, for example? We think about what we want to wear. Wedding dress, massively important. And we spend thousands on our wedding dresses because it's going to be in all the photos. It's a key memory that you have of your wedding. We think about what we're going to eat, what we're going to drink. Are we going to serve wine? We go on tasting sessions. We think about guest list, who we want to share that very special day with, because it's such a special event. And unless you've got an infinite budget, you have to think carefully about narrowing down who you want to spend that special day with. We think about the atmosphere we want to create. We think about music and playlists. You know, do we want a live band? Do we want a DJ? Literally everything I have just said, when talking in the context of weddings, we should be applying to our births, because you can control all of those things with your birth. You can put preferences down for all of those things. You can think about writing plans. You can think about venue. Most people completely discount giving birth at home. They don't even consider it, because there's a misconceived idea that home birth is really dangerous. So we don't even consider the idea of giving birth, particularly first-time parents. And there's loads of evidence to show that it's perfectly safe, and actually you have better outcomes giving birth at home for a lot of people. You know, or are you going to give birth on the midwifery-led unit or a birth centre, or are you going to give birth in hospital? What you want to wear, that's really important. If you feel really uncomfortable and really self-conscious, that can affect the actual progress of your labour. You don't have to wear a hospital gown. You can wear whatever you want. Eating and drinking, massively important. Have you planned for snacks for your birth bag? For both you and your birth partner. You know, you don't really want your birth partner going off to Costa Coffee to go and find something to eat in the middle of labor because they're feeling a bit faint. You know, and you need to be eating. If you're pregnant, you need to be eating and drinking when you're in labor, because if you don't, your labor will stall, because you'll get dehydrated, you'll run out of energy, and your labor will stall. Guest list. Who do you want at your birth? Who do you want there supporting you? Do you want your husband there, or your wife? Do you want a doula? Do you even know what a doula is? You know, do you want an independent midwife? Do you want a free birth? Does your mother-in-law want to be there? Do you get on with your mother-in-law? If you don't, she shouldn't be there. You know, atmosphere, hugely important, because it affects the hormones that help progress labor. Music and playlist. You know, definitely put a playlist together for labor. It's going to help with the emotions and the hormones and help labor progress. Lots of people, when they look at doing a hypnobirthing course or any kind of antenatal course, the cost puts them off. And I would say, invest in your birth. It's really important. That, however much a buggy is now, I don't know, my youngest is 3, but that £1,000 buggy, or however much you're planning to spend on a buggy, yes, it's useful and it's important, but I would be putting that money towards birth prep, because we spend thousands of pounds on our weddings because it's a very special day, and then we go, oh, 200, 400 pounds on a birth prep course. It's quite a lot of money. Your birth is more important. I would say your birth is far more important and much more of a monumental milestone than your wedding. Because if your wedding doesn't go to plan, I mean, yes, it's going to be upsetting. It won't leave you with PTSD. If your birth doesn't go the way that you hoped and you weren't prepared for it and you hadn't prepped and planned, that genuinely can leave you with birth trauma. It's really important that you prepare for your birth. It can also impact your child as well. So invest in your birth prep. Far more important than other aspects of you know, important milestones in your life. So next, I want you to imagine someone giving birth. So I want you to close your eyes, and I want you to envisage in your mind's eye someone giving birth. So have a think about what that person looks like. Think about what environment they're in. Think about what they look like, you know, what position they're in, who's around them, what sounds they might be making. Now, once you've got that in your head, okay, most people will think of really medicalized images in their head when they think about someone giving birth. Someone on their back, red-faced, sweaty, knees up, doctor in between their legs shouting, push! But the person in labor squeezing their partner's hand going, I effing hate you, you've done this to me, that kind of thing, right? That's the image that is conjured up quite often when we think about giving birth. What we don't think of most of the time is calm, relaxed, you know, euphoric, even beautiful kind of births. And the reason that we don't think about these kind of images of birth is because that's not what we're shown. That's not the narrative that we get exposed to throughout our lives. You know, if you think back to every time you've seen someone give birth on TV, I could put money on the fact that it's normally traumatic, it's normally dramatic, it's normally very medicalized. It's always a rush, it's an urgency. Oh my God, whoosh, her waters break in the middle of the supermarket, and everyone's like, oh my God, panicking, get her to hospital. Oh my God, she's in labor. And this drip feed of very medicalized, traumatic versions of birth, that gets stored away in our brains, and then that's what we expect. That's been normalized, okay, when it comes to birth, and that is an issue. That's a problem. So to understand how these kind of these images and this kind of conditioning that we have had around birth is problematic and how it affects us, we need to understand the brain. Now, this is a key part of hypnobirthing, understanding the brain and how it affects the body. So your mind is split into two parts. You have your conscious mind and your subconscious mind. Now, your conscious mind is unique in humans. Other mammals don't have a conscious mind. And this is where you do all of your logical and critical and analytical thinking. It's where your willpower comes from, and it's where your short-term memory resides. Your subconscious, which is the bit that we're interested in for birth, is really important because this is where your instincts come from. And this is where your long-term memory sits. Now, if you think back to the way birth is represented, you know, news stories, you know, about birth are always about tragedies, you know, horrific medicalized births in TV shows and film, even friends and family telling you about their traumatic and horrible experience of giving birth. All of that gets stored in our subconscious. And our subconscious does that because its primary function is survival. Now, this is a primitive part of our brain, and millions of years ago, the world was dangerous. We needed to store away memories to keep us safe, so that if we came across similar dangerous situations or dangerous animals, our subconscious would fling up the memories of previous experiences and warn us that when we're in danger. And our brain still works in that way. So it stores away all of these negative messages and traumatic stories of birth, and it puts them in a little birth folder in your subconscious filing system to refer to later. And that means that we all have this folder in the subconscious, believing that birth is really painful and dramatic and traumatic and risky. And this is a problem because it affects your decision making, because you're making decisions based on where to give birth, how to give birth, based on societal beliefs rather than actual evidence and fact and physiology. And it affects the progression of labor as well. And the reason that it affects the progression of labor is because of the autonomic nervous system. So this is, again, survival instincts, part of our brains from millions of years ago. And the autonomic nervous system has two different branches: parasympathetic nervous system and sympathetic nervous system. So our parasympathetic nervous system is the state that we are in when we feel safe. We feel relaxed, we feel calm. You're in your parasympathetic nervous system. When you feel stressed and anxious, you trigger your sympathetic nervous system. So this is your freeze, fight, or flight state. And when you trigger that, your heart starts pounding, your blood starts pumping. It's literally sending oxygenated blood to your arms and your legs to run away from the threat that you perceive in front of you. Now, for birth to unfold and to progress naturally, we need to be in the parasympathetic nervous system state, the rest and digest state, feeling safe, feeling calm, feeling loved, feeling comfortable. When we're in that state, our brain releases oxytocin, and oxytocin is the key hormone for labor. It's responsible for triggering contractions and progressing labor. It's really important. Birth doesn't happen if you don't have oxytocin. Now, when you feel stressed and anxious, instead of producing oxytocin, your brain's going to release adrenaline. And that adrenaline is going to give you the oomph to run away from a perceived threat or defend yourself. Now, if you think back to primitive times, if you were in labor and a saber-toothed tiger leapt out at you, you need to trigger the sympathetic nervous system. You need that big boost of adrenaline to give you the oomph to protect yourself, to protect you and your unborn baby, or run away as fast as possible from the perceived threat. You don't want your baby being born in the middle of that. So the adrenaline is going to shut down labor. It's going to stop contractions. It's going to shut down labor. Baby should not be born in a dangerous situation. And once you're safe again, then the adrenaline levels start to drop. Oxytocin levels start to increase. You go out of the sympathetic nervous system state and back into the rest and digest parasympathetic nervous system state, and then labor can pick back up. Now, obviously, in modern day labor, we are safe. But because most of us, or a lot of us, are so terrified about giving birth and worried about what happens when we get to hospital, am I going to make it in time? Will I find parking? Are they going to prod and poke me? What if something happens? That we quite often enter the sympathetic nervous system when we start to produce adrenaline. Now, most people will go into labor at home. And that's because you're safe at home, you're comfortable, your body will kick off labor, the oxytocin levels are nice and high. And then we take ourselves out of this environment that is familiar and comfortable, and we plonk ourselves in a very medicalized environment that is not familiar. You've got complete strangers, lovely midwives, but you probably never met them before, shoving their entire hands up your bits to feel your cervix, to see how dilated you are. You're in a brightly lit medicalized environment. It smells different. There's people coming in and out of the room. And then it's no wonder that the contractions that were really intense and made you leave your house go, and they stop. They slow down and they space out, and labor stalls when you get to hospital. And that's because we have disrupted labor by triggering the sympathetic nervous system. And that can quite often lead to a cascade of medical intervention. Because if your labor is not progressing, and it's difficult to get it progressing again because of the environment that you're in, then the hospital is probably going to want to intervene to speed things up. And that means breaking your waters and giving you synthetic oxytocin to augment labor and get things going again. And that in turn can increase the risk of things like instrumental birth and CAESAREAN. Not always, but again, sometimes, quite often it can happen. So the hypnobirthing is going to give you the tools and techniques to get the anxiety levels down if you feel them beginning to rise. It's going to give you knowledge and understanding of the process of birth and how to help it unfold, how to facilitate birth. It's going to teach you about the birth environment and how to set up that oxytocin conducive environment, regardless of where you are, home, hospital, birthing center, wherever. And it's going to work on a subconscious level to clear out a lot of those unhelpful misconceptions, negative thoughts about birth, and start to build new, more healthy, balanced, more positive associations around birth, so that you are less likely to get triggered when you go into labor and start to feel stressed and anxious, which will in turn slow labor down. Really important to do a really good course so that you understand what your options are. And this is something that I spend time on in my courses. Just this morning, I was teaching a couple and we went through birth preferences and we covered loads and loads of stuff. We talked about vitamin K and why it's given to babies, what it's used to prevent, and what the alternatives are. We talked about third stage of labor, how you want to birth your placenta, what the risks of having synthetic oxytocin are, which is the standard procedure in hospital. We talked about optimal cord clamping. We talked about all the different comfort measures, ranging from TENS machine all the way to diamorphine and epidural, and what the pros and cons of those are. If you don't know what your options are, you don't have any. And there are things that they may do as routine in hospital, or the midwife may do as routine, which you genuinely wouldn't choose if you knew what the alternatives are. It's really, really important that you put preferences down on paper and you do your research. If you go away and do nothing else but do that, then I'm happy, because I really, really feel strongly about making sure that you understand what your preferences are. If you don't have any preferences, you haven't done any research, and then you end up with an unplanned C-section, that can be genuinely really traumatic, because you feel completely disempowered, out of control, and that can be really negative. If you've planned for a C-section, even though you planned a home birth, if you put plans in place for a C-section, you put your preferences down and they honor those, then that C-section is going to feel much more positive. It's really, really important that you put plans together. So I know there's lots of different ways that you can learn hypnobirthing. You can read a book. You can do a really cheap downloadable course. Why would you do one-to-one classes with a live instructor? Because it is more of an investment, right? But you get what you pay for, okay? You get to ask questions in real time, which you won't get. You won't get that support if you read a book or you do a pre-recorded course. I can tailor courses unique to your individual pregnancy. We can talk about your unique anxieties and fears and how to address them. I also work very closely with my local hospital. I'm the chair for my local hospital's Maternity Voices Partnership, which means that every 2 months I host a meeting with the head of midwifery, with all the matrons, with health visitors, with infant feeding teams, and then all of the people in the local area that I have given birth in the past couple of years. And I pass all the feedback from everybody that's using the hospital and the maternity services, and we work together to improve things. That gives me a unique insight into how hospitals work and how the NHS works. And I then in turn can use that to help you. That's not something that everybody has knowledge of. You're more likely to practice, and it's really important to practice. Your birth partner is more likely to get involved. If you read a book and hand it to them, I mean, they might read it, but equally they might not, depends how engaged they are. And the most important thing, I think, is that you get access to me from the moment you book me right until you give birth. I've got clients who did courses with me months ago who are now WhatsApping me because they've gone overdue and they're being offered inductions and they're having a wobble and they don't know what to do and they can't remember what we talked about in the course, or they just need a pep talk. And I'm there to support them. So you get that one-to-one kind of virtual support from me right the way through until you give birth, which is quite frankly invaluable. Some couples don't need that support very much. Some of them who are having very complicated pregnancies, or they're getting supported, I say supported in air quotes, by people who are being not supportive or really strong arming them into pathways of care that they really don't want, then they lean quite heavily on me for support to help them navigate that. Hopefully you don't need it, but I'm here if you do. And I think that's quite unique in terms of support that you get with me. So the courses that I teach, there are lots of different ones. The complete course is my most comprehensive course. That is 4 2-hour sessions, usually taken over 4 consecutive weeks. And that is a very comprehensive course. It covers quite a lot. You get hypnobirthing MP3s, a workbook, you get a massive bank of resources, which quite a lot of my clients don't realize how much is in there actually. But you get my induction guide. I'm going to be releasing a home birth myth busting guide as well. You get access to that. And then you get the ongoing support from me from booking until birth. You can do courses over Zoom. And the majority of my clients book over Zoom because they are nowhere near me, because I teach up and down the country. But if you are in Kent, and you can get to me, or Southeast London, then I do have face-to-face clients who book with me as well, and they come to my home for their sessions. I also do the same course in a group, which is solely online, and that is run every single month, 4 weeks, with between 3 to 4 other couples over Zoom. It's 325 for the group and 395 for one-to-one. And like I said, that is really, really comprehensive. So that covers the psychology and physiology of birth. It talks about stages of labor. It talks about the hypnobirthing basics, the breathing, the visualizations, the affirmations. It talks about birth environment and birth positions, birth plans, induction, tons. It really is very, very comprehensive. If you are short on time or you're short on budget, then I do an essentials course, which is 2 1.5-hour sessions, or 1 3-hour session if you are really short on time and you're quite late in pregnancy. That's £150, and again can be done online or face to face. Obviously, because it's 3 hours versus 8, it's really pared down. So we just cover the hypnobirthing and then we cover birth planning because that's all there's time for in a 3-hour course. It's also really good as a refresher if you've done hypnobirthing before. Sometimes I do group courses if I get demand for them, but I don't run them regularly. So if you are interested in doing a group essentials course, then that would be £100 if I have more than one couple interested on doing a group session for the essentials course. And then if you are planning for a elective cesarean, I also do a cesarean course, which again is 3 hours or 2 1.5 hour sessions. And the content for that is C-section specific. So you get specific MP3s for C-sections, birth plan templates, and we go through what happens with the C-section, what your options are for birth planning, and tips for post-birth recovery as well. Final thing, going back to the beginning of the session, when I asked you what's the first word that pops into your head when you think about birth. So has it changed? What's the first word that comes into your head when you think about giving birth? So hopefully that just demonstrates that just a little bit of information can change how you're feeling slightly about birth. And imagine what you can achieve doing a full 8-hour course with somebody. It is really important that you do your prep. And it is really important that you learn about birth because it's going to help you feel more in control. And that's what's ultimately what's going to lead to a positive experience. If I don't hear from you, then good luck. Hopefully have an amazing birth. Go do your birth plan, go do some reading. It's really, really important. But I wish you the best birth possible.